If you are joining us for the first time tonight, let me catch you up in 30 seconds. A woman named Alice Remington climbed into the wrong carriage to escape a monster. The wrong carriage belonged to a princess. The princess brought her to a feral alpha king who was losing his mind in the catacombs of a fortress carved from black stone. Alice's bloodline, old seer blood, nearly extinct, reached through the madness and pulled the man back from the edge. The king who sold her life showed up at the gates with 300 soldiers. The king who had been a beast that morning killed him with his bare hands. And Alice Remington, who woke up yesterday morning as a runaway with a stolen cloak and a plan involving a merchant wagon, went to sleep last night as the queen of the Southern monarchy. That was part 1. Here is where things get complicated. Because there is something living in Alice Remington's blood that nobody at the Iron Fong Citadel knows about. Not Beatrice, who brought her here. Not Alaric, who bonded with her. Not even Alice herself. The Obsidian Coven knows. The Obsidian Coven has always known. And the reason they never said it out loud is the most important thing in this entire story. This is part 2. The sun rose over the Iron Fong Citadel the morning after Levi Montgomery died, and found the fortress in a state that could best be described as controlled astonishment. 300 Reedridge warriors were camped in the pass below the gates, their wolves settled, their weapons stacked in orderly surrender piles at the perimeter. They had been fed. Alaric had ordered it, and the order had been obeyed without question, which said something significant about the difference between a feral king and a sane one, and they were waiting with the patient resignation of men who have lost their context and are waiting for someone to give them new instructions about what they are now. The answer, it turned out, was that they were now Iron Fong soldiers. The northern territories that Levi Montgomery had spent 3 decades carving out of other people's lands were, by the law he had invoked and then broken in the same breath, now absorbed into the Iron Fong monarchy. 300 warriors who had marched south to recover a contracted mate had woken up as subjects of the king they had come to threaten. History, as it so often does, had moved faster than anyone's plans for it. Inside the citadel, the morning was quieter but no less rearranged. The council was in session before the sun had fully cleared the mountain peaks. 8 senior advisors who had spent the last 3 months managing a kingdom whose king was inaccessible and whose neighboring territories were beginning to sense blood in the water. They had been extraordinarily competent in crisis and extraordinarily rattled by resolution, which is the nature of people whose entire professional identity is built around managing a problem. When the problem suddenly becomes a person again, when the feral king walks into the council chamber lucid and present and terrifyingly competent, there is a certain amount of institutional recalibration required. They were also being asked to recognize a queen. Alice Remington. Fallen northern nobility. Daughter of a house that had been reduced to glorified merchants before her uncles sold her name to settle a debt. No political connections. No court education in the Southern manner. No diplomatic experience. No history with the Iron Fong monarchy beyond having arrived in it yesterday on the end of a chain of coincidences so unlikely that half the council had already privately decided the moon goddess must have been directly involved. There were objections. There are always objections. Alaric Cross heard all of them in the manner of a man who has considered the matter from every relevant angle and arrived at a conclusion that no council vote will alter. He heard them with the particular patience of someone who is not actually listening because the decision is already made, and the discussion is a courtesy he is extending because he is, despite everything, a civilized person. Then he explained that Alice Remington had done what 3 months of coven ritual and council intervention and royal bride procurement had failed to do. She had reached through his madness and brought him back. She had seen the blade in the shadows and saved his life. She was his recognized fated mate, and she would be his queen, and these facts were not subject to amendment. The council recognized the queen. What no one said in that council chamber, what no one was saying anywhere in the citadel, though it hovered in the air of every hallway and every room, was the question that had no polite answer yet. What was Alice Remington? Not in the political sense. In the factual sense. The dormant Remington seer gifts were known, documented, historical, catalogued in the old texts. But what had happened in the courtyard the afternoon before was not a catalogued ability. Northern seers, at the height of their gifts, could read omens. They could interpret dreams. They could sometimes feel the weight of approaching weather or the emotional resonance of important decisions. The old texts described a gentle, contemplative gift, not unlike a heightened intuition, expressed in symbolic rather than literal terms. What Alice had experienced in the courtyard was not symbolic. She had seen specific events, 3 seconds ahead of their occurrence, in perfect and actionable detail. She had seen a specific man's face, a specific weapon, a specific trajectory. And she had acted on the information with a clarity and speed that suggested the vision hadn't frightened her, that some part of her had received it and processed it as readily as ordinary sight. That was not in any text anyone at the Iron Fong Citadel had access to. Beatrice Cross, who had more access to obscure historical documentation than anyone in the monarchy, spent the morning after the battle in her private library. She had pulled 17 texts in the 3 hours since sunrise. Her gold eyes moved through the pages with the specific intensity of someone who is not reading for pleasure, but is looking for something they are fairly certain they will not enjoy finding. She found it. At the bottom of the 43rd page of a political history of the Northern Reaches, written a century before Alice was born, in a footnote so deliberately understated it could only have been written by someone trying to make it ignorable. A single paragraph about the Remington bloodline's most significant historical ability. Not seer gifts. Not the reading of omens. The ability to see, with perfect, actionable clarity, events as they unfolded in real time across any distance they had a living bond connection to. Not 3 seconds ahead. Anywhere. Anytime. Across any distance. Through any barrier. A living intelligence network, tied to every bond the seer had ever formed, capable of seeing anything that threatened anyone they were connected to. This was not a gift. It was a weapon. And it was sitting in a bedroom 2 corridors away from the library, looking at its own hands and wondering why they wouldn't stop shaking. Alice had slept, eventually, in the room they had given her, a chamber large enough to contain her entire childhood home, appointed in the deep blues and blacks of the Iron Fong aesthetic, warm enough to finally drive the mountain chill from her bones. She had slept the sleep of profound physical exhaustion, the kind that happens when the body has processed more adrenaline in 24 hours than it typically manages in a year and has simply shut down all non-essential functions to deal with the aftermath. She woke up already thinking. Not about the courtyard. Not about Levi Montgomery. Not about the bond that hummed in her chest like a second heartbeat, still unfamiliar, still enormous, still settling into the architecture of who she was. She was thinking about what she had seen in that vision. Because it hadn't stopped when the danger passed. Since the bolt had struck the cobblestones, she had seen 3 more things she wasn't supposed to be able to see. Small things, a guard in the eastern wing taking a stone step wrong in the dark, a horse in the stables favoring its left front leg, a section of the Citadel's ancient drainage system failing in the northwest corner where 2 walls met. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing that required screaming into a courtyard. But she had seen them. Without trying. Without a heat at the base of her skull or a doubling of her vision. Just information, arriving through some channel she hadn't known existed yesterday, with the matter-of-fact reliability of something that had always been there and had only been waiting for permission to work. The dormant blood of a northern seer. She looked at her hands. She was beginning to understand that dormant was the past tense. The Obsidian Coven had been the Iron Fong monarchy's most trusted, and most carefully managed, magical resource for 200 years. That distinction, trusted and carefully managed, was doing a great deal of work in that sentence. Because the relationship between the Cross family and the Obsidian Coven was not the relationship between patron and servant, or ally and ally, or even employer and employee. It was something older and more complicated and significantly more tense, the relationship between two powers that needed each other and neither one of whom was entirely comfortable with the needing. The Coven provided prophecy, ritual support, and the kind of magical infrastructure that kept an ancient bloodline's more volatile tendencies from becoming political problems. The Cross family provided the Coven's charter, their protection, their resources, and the sovereign authority that kept other, less understanding powers from attempting to disband or absorb them. They needed each other. They did not, as a rule, tell each other everything. The Coven had given Beatrice the prophecy about the Northern Seer 6 weeks before the convocation. They had described the dormant blood, the anchoring effect, the specific frequency of the Remington lineage that could cut through Alaric's feral madness. They had presented this information with the measured, carefully curated confidence of people who know exactly how much they are saying and exactly how much they are choosing not to. Beatrice had taken the prophecy at face value because she needed something to work, and this was the only thing the Coven had offered. She should have pressed harder. She understood this now, in the library, 43 pages into a political history she had never had reason to read before yesterday, looking at a footnote that rearranged her understanding of what she had done. She had not simply delivered a seer to anchor her brother's soul. She had delivered something the Coven had apparently known about for a very long time, something they had chosen to present as a healing tool rather than what it actually was. The Remington bloodline, at its peak, had been the most powerful intelligence asset the Northern Territories had ever produced. Not a weapon in the conventional sense. Not a military capability. Something subtler and more absolute. The ability to see, through the network of bonds a seer cultivated, anything that threatened anything they were connected to. Not vaguely. Not symbolically. With the specific, actionable clarity that Alice had demonstrated in the courtyard. Across any distance. Through any barrier. With the reliability of a sense rather than a gift. This was why the Northern Seer bloodlines had been systematically eliminated in the 2 decades before Alice was born. Not by pack wars. Not by the Blight. By someone who understood what the Remington Seers could see, and who had very specific reasons for not wanting anyone to see it. Beatrice Cross set down the book. She sat very still for a moment in her library, surrounded by 17 texts and the particular, cold clarity of a mind that has just connected something important. The political upheavals that had destroyed the Northern nobility, the pack wars that had gutted the Remington holdings, the blight that had seemed so devastating and so comprehensive and so conveniently targeted at specific territories, had been mapped and documented and accepted as the unfortunate consequences of a destabilized region. No one, in the official record, had asked why those specific territories. Why those specific houses? Why the Blight had seemed to know exactly which lands to ruin? Why the Remington family specifically, the oldest surviving Seer bloodline in the North, had been reduced so precisely to a single girl who didn't even know what she was. The elimination of the Northern Seers had not been collateral damage. It had been the objective. And the people who had orchestrated it, the people who had spent 20 years ensuring that the bloodline capable of seeing everything was reduced to a single dormant carrier who had been sold into a mating contract and was supposed to disappear into Levi Montgomery's household and die there without ever waking up. Those people were going to realize, very soon, that their plan had failed. They were going to realize that Alice Remington was alive and bonded and wearing the title of Iron Fong Queen. They were going to realize that the gift they had tried to bury was awake. And they were going to come for her. Not in the way Levi Montgomery had come. Loudly, legally, with 300 soldiers in the open pass. In the way that people come when they have spent 20 years being careful and patient and thorough. In the way that people come when they know exactly what they're dealing with and are terrified of it. Beatrice Cross sat in her library. She thought about the fact that she had brought Alice here. She thought about the fact that she had not known what Alice was. Not really, not the full truth, and that the coven had let her not know. She thought about the fact that the coven had a prophecy and had chosen to share only the part that served the immediate crisis. The question she was sitting with was not whether Alice was in danger. The question was whether the danger had a name she recognized. The door opened. It was Alice. She had dressed in the clothes that had been laid out for her. Heavy emerald fabric, the iron fong style, built for a mountain climate rather than the northern fashions she was used to. She looked like someone who had been placed in a role slightly too large and was currently deciding whether to grow into it or be swallowed by it. She looked at Beatrice's collection of open texts. She looked at Beatrice's expression. And she said, in the voice of someone who has been doing their own thinking all morning and has arrived at an uncomfortable destination. She needed to know what was really in her blood. Because something had changed in the courtyard and it hadn't changed back. And she thought Beatrice knew more than she had said. Beatrice looked at the woman her brother had called Queen. She thought about the footnote on page 43. She thought about the people who had spent 20 years ensuring Alice never woke up. She thought about the fact that the Iron Fong Citadel was formidable, ancient, and defended by the best soldiers in the Southern Territories. And that none of that had stopped the last queen of the Remington bloodline from being dismantled. And then Beatrice Cross told Alice Remington the truth. Not all of it. She didn't have all of it yet. But enough. Enough to watch Alice's face change from the face of someone receiving difficult news to the face of someone understanding, with complete and irreversible clarity, that the story she had been living was not the story she had thought she was in. Alice Remington had not escaped a monster. She had been allowed to escape. She had been allowed to arrive here. And the question now was, by whom? Alaric Cross was not a man who processed things by sitting still. He had spent 3 months unable to do anything else, trapped in the cycle of shifting and snarling and losing the thread of himself in the dark, with nothing to do but endure. And the return of his mind came packaged with an almost overwhelming need to move, to use his body for something deliberate, to convert the surplus energy of restored sanity into something physical and productive and under his control. He was in the training yard when Beatrice found him. He fought the way he did everything, with a precision that looked like restraint but was actually something else, the particular efficiency of a man who has learned that the shortest distance between 2 points in combat is never the obvious one and has internalized that knowledge to the level of muscle memory. His guard had learned long ago not to go easy on him in training. Going easy produced nothing useful. Alaric wanted resistance. He wanted opposition. He wanted to be tested. He did not, as Beatrice walked across the training yard toward him with an expression she was working very hard to keep neutral, want to hear what she had to say. He knew her well enough to know she was carrying something heavy. He had known her long enough to know that her neutral expression was the expression she deployed when the news was the kind that required a settled mind to receive, and that she had assessed the probability of him having a settled mind and was attempting to stage manage the environment accordingly. He let his guard step back. He looked at his sister. He listened. What Beatrice told him in the training yard, stripped down to its essential architecture, the footnotes and implications and interconnected historical threads that she had spent the morning following, was this. His mate was not simply a northern seer whose blood happened to provide a sovereign remedy to feral madness. She was the last carrier of the most significant intelligence ability the continent had produced in 3 centuries. The ability had woken up. It was apparently already operational. And the people who had spent 20 years engineering the extinction of that ability, quietly, patiently, through a mechanism disguised as political misfortune and agricultural disaster, were going to know that their work had been undone. He was also not yet aware that it was his aunt. Beatrice did not say this immediately. She gave him the information in the order that allowed his mind to arrive at the conclusion rather than having it handed to him, because Beatrice Cross understood her brother well enough to know that the conclusions he reached himself were the ones he acted on with full conviction rather than half conviction wrapped in disbelief. He listened. He was very still. The kind of stillness that is not the absence of reaction but the presence of complete, focused attention, the stillness of a predator processing incoming information and determining its threat classification with great speed and care. Ilarion Cross. Their mother's sister. Their father's most trusted advisor during the border expansion years. The woman who had managed the domestic intelligence of the Iron Fong monarchy for a decade before stepping back from official roles, citing age, citing health, maintaining a private residence in the southern lowlands, maintaining access to people and channels that had never fully been accounted for in the official record. The woman who had told the council 3 months ago that they needed to find a solution to the feral crisis quickly. Who had advocated, specifically and insistently, for a series of Northern Bride candidates who all happened to share the characteristic of not having any meaningful seer lineage. Who had been, when Beatrice proposed the Remington girl on the basis of the Coven's prophecy, one of the loudest voices objecting. Who had argued that a Northern seer was too unpredictable, too politically complicated, too much of an unknown quantity in the court of a recovering king. Who had said, specifically, that they should send Alice Remington back to Montgomery and find a more suitable candidate. Alaric understood the shape of it before Beatrice finished. He understood, standing in the training yard in the cold mountain morning with his mate's bond humming in his chest like a second heartbeat, that the woman he had called aunt for 30 years had spent the same 30 years systematically eliminating the one bloodline that could have told him, at any point, what she was actually doing. She had not done it alone. A project of that scope, documented in the margins of political history as ordinary misfortune, maintained across 2 decades without leaving a visible seam, required resources and partnerships and the specific kind of institutional patience that belongs to people who think in generations rather than years. There was a network. There were names he didn't have yet. But there was a center. And the center knew that Alice was alive. The center was going to act. The question was not whether an attempt would be made. The question was whether Alice would see it coming. Here is the thing about a Remington seer in full operation, which neither Alaric nor Beatrice fully understood yet, which Alice herself was only beginning to discover. The ability was not passive. It was not a system that delivered warnings upon request or lit up when danger crossed a certain threshold. It was a living network tied to bonds. Every bond Alice formed deepened the range and resolution of what she could see. Her bond with Alaric had been the earthquake that woke the gift. But Alaric was one connection. One point on a network that, at its full historic expression, had reportedly given the senior Remington seers visibility across every inhabited territory in the northern reaches. She had been bonded for less than 24 hours. She was already seeing things she shouldn't be able to see from inside a mountain fortress. What would she see in a week? What would she see in a year? What would she see when she understood what she was carrying well enough to use it deliberately, rather than receiving it in fragments and trying to make sense of the fragments afterward? Alaric Cross stood in the training yard and looked at the sky above the Black Mountains and understood, with a particular, complete certainty that the mate bond allows between 2 people, that the woman in the library 2 levels above him was the most strategically significant person in the Southern Territories, and that the people who had tried to erase her were already moving. The Raven arrived from the east. The message it carried was unsigned, written in a hand that had been deliberately altered, on paper that had been sourced from no traceable origin. Intelligence tradecraft. The kind that belongs to people who have been doing this for a very long time and have no intention of being found before they are ready. It contained 4 words. We know she woke. Alice Remington spent the afternoon learning what she was. Not from books. The books at the Iron Fong Citadel, it turned out, had a conspicuous absence in their documentation of the Remington bloodline, a gap so precisely shaped that it was almost certainly deliberate. Someone had ensured that the most detailed accounts of what a fully operational Northern Seer could do were not available in the most powerful library in the Southern Territories. This told Alice something important. Whoever had done the erasing had access, had authority, had understood, specifically, what knowledge to remove and from where to remove it to make the gap ignorable rather than suspicious. This was not a crime of opportunity. She learned instead from the gift itself. It was Alaric's idea, and it said something about how completely his mind had been restored, about the quality of the clarity he was operating in, that he had the idea at all. He was not a man accustomed to thinking strategically about abilities he didn't possess. He had spent 30 years thinking strategically about abilities he did possess, and the extension of that framework to a different skill set required the kind of lateral thinking that had apparently been waiting, compressed and urgent, through 3 months of madness. He proposed that they test the range. Systematically. Deliberately. With variables they could control and results they could measure, the way any competent general tests a new asset before committing to a strategy that depends on it. He sent a guard to the eastern watchtower, the same tower where the mercenary had crouched with his crossbow the day before, without telling Alice where the guard was going or what he was instructed to do. Then he sat across from Alice in the private council chamber and watched her. He watched her notice the guard arriving in the watchtower before any sound or signal could have communicated it. He watched her describe, with exact specificity, what the guard was doing. Then he sent a second guard. Then a third. Then he sent a guard to the stables, a mile below the citadel. Then a rider into the mountain pass. Then a patrol to the border checkpoint that sat at the base of the pass, 2 miles from the gates. 2 miles. Through mountain rock. Through stone walls feet thick. Alice described everything. Every guard. Every action. Every detail. Not with the tentative, apologetic quality of someone trying and hoping. With the matter-of-fact reliability of someone reading aloud from a document they can see clearly. She was not straining. She was not searching. She was reporting what arrived, the way a person with functioning eyes reports what they see in a lit room. Not because they are working hard but because the information is simply present. Alaric watched all of this with an expression that had progressed, over the course of 2 hours, from focus to awed to something that sat underneath both of those in a place that didn't have a clean name. Something protective and fierce and enormous, of the specific variety that belongs to people who have realized that the thing they love is also the thing that will be most aggressively targeted by the things they fear. She was extraordinary. She was in extraordinary danger. Both of those things were simultaneously and absolutely true. There were limits. She discovered them herself, reporting them as she found them, with the pragmatic approach of someone who is more interested in accuracy than impressiveness. Distance attenuated the resolution. The further the subject, the more she saw broad strokes rather than fine detail. The strength of the bond mattered. She could see through her connection to Alaric with a resolution she couldn't match with anyone else, which made sense in the logic of the gift even if it also meant her most powerful view was currently a sample size of 1. She also couldn't direct the vision in real time. It arrived. She received it. She reported it. The strategic applications were considerable, but they were not unlimited, and the limits were worth knowing precisely. By the end of the afternoon, they had a map of what she could do, what she could not yet see, what the gift had not yet revealed to her, through any connection in her still small network of bonds, was the woman in the southern lowlands who was writing letters in the careful, unhurried hand of someone who has already decided that urgency is a form of weakness. Ilarion Cross wrote 4 letters that afternoon. Each went to a different name in a network built over 20 years. Each contained the same essential information. The seer had woken. The Iron Fong had bonded her. The plan required revision. Each letter also contained instructions. The instructions were not for violence. Violence was what Levi Montgomery had tried, and Levi Montgomery was dead on the cobblestones of his own siege. Ilarion Cross had not spent 20 years building a quiet, patient, precisely maintained network by making the same mistakes as men who thought volume and force were substitutes for planning. She understood, had always understood, that the most effective way to destroy something extraordinary was not to attack it directly. It was to corrupt what it trusted. The letters were addressed to people inside the Iron Fong Citadel. Alice felt them arrive. Not the letters specifically. Not the content. She had no bond connection to Ilarion Cross, no thread to follow to the southern lowlands, no visibility into a network she hadn't yet learned existed. But she felt something wrong. A pressure at the edges of what she could see. The specific, uncomfortable sensation of information that was present but being blocked, like sound that is just below audible, like a shape in peripheral vision that disappears when you look directly at it. She told Alaric. She couldn't say what it was. She couldn't name it or locate it or describe it in any terms more specific than, "Something is wrong inside this building and I cannot see it clearly, and that is the part that frightens me most." Because the gift, by its nature, saw through bonds. And whatever was wrong inside the citadel was being orchestrated through channels she had no bond connection to. She was being deliberately blinded by the limits of her own network. Alaric understood what that meant before she had finished saying it. The attack would come from inside. The question was which inside. Alice Remington sat in the window of her chamber at the top of one of the Iron Fong Citadel's towers and looked out at the mountain landscape in the dark. Below her, the pass was quiet. The Reed Ridge warriors who had surrendered at the gate were in their camp, their fires small and controlled. The Iron Fong Guard had tripled since the Raven's message. A message that Alaric had shared with her, because he had decided, apparently without requiring consideration, that his queen would have access to every piece of information that he had access to, and that any advisor who felt differently could take that feeling and maintain it in silence. The bond hummed in her chest. She was already accustomed to it, which alarmed her slightly, that something so enormous could feel, after less than 48 hours, as natural as her own heartbeat. As if it had always been there and the courtyard had not created it but simply revealed it. She was thinking about choice. Not the choice that had been made for her. The carriage, the convocation, the contract her uncle had signed. Not the choices she had made in panic. The running, the wrong door, the survival calculus that had put her in this tower on this mountain in this kingdom. She was thinking about the choice she was making now. In the morning, tomorrow, when the sun came up and the council met and the map of what she could and couldn't see was presented to the people who would need to act on it, she would be asked to do something she had not been asked to do before. Not run. Not survive. Not simply demonstrate what she was and let other people decide what it meant. She would be asked to use the gift. Not in reaction, the way she had used it in the courtyard, receiving what arrived, acting on instinct, screaming a warning without a plan. Deliberately. Strategically. As a tool in the hands of people who needed intelligence about a network that had been built specifically to destroy her bloodline, and that was now pivoting to ensure that its one remaining carrier couldn't be used against it. She would be asked to start building bonds. Deliberately. Quickly. As many as she could. To each loyal member of the household, to each guard captain, to each person in the citadel who represented a potential view through the walls she currently couldn't see through. Because the gift was a network, and a network's power was in its size, and right now she was essentially one node trying to map a citadel that had hundreds. She was being asked to trust, and to let that trust become a weapon. Alice Remington, who had learned in her uncle's hallway that trust was a door other people used to walk in and take what they wanted, who had built her entire escape plan on the principle that the only reliable variable was herself, was being asked to turn that philosophy inside out. She thought about what Beatrice had told her in the library. She thought about the woman in the southern lowlands writing careful letters to people whose names she didn't know yet, in a network she couldn't see yet, orchestrating a plan whose shape she could feel pressing at the edges of her gift like something knocking on a door she hadn't found the lock to. She thought about the seers who had come before her. The ones who had been reduced and destroyed and erased over 20 years through a campaign so patient and so careful that it had been successfully disguised as ordinary misfortune. People who had carried the same gift she was carrying, the same network capability, the same extraordinary and apparently threatening ability to see what other people needed hidden. They had been taken apart one at a time, isolated, made to seem like they had died of the same forces that were destroying everyone else in the Northern Territories. Made to seem like individual tragedies rather than a coordinated project. Because they hadn't known what they were dealing with. Because no one had told them what to look for. Because the gift was powerful but it wasn't armor, and knowing everything that was coming was not the same as having somewhere safe to stand when it arrived. She was not going to make the same mistake. She was not going to carry this gift alone. Alice Remington made a decision. She made it in the dark at a window, looking out at mountains she hadn't known existed a week ago, with the bond of a man she hadn't known existed a week ago humming in her chest. And she made it with the complete, deliberate, clear-eyed certainty of someone who has spent a lifetime making decisions in the dark and has finally, found a place where the decision doesn't have to be made alone. In the morning, she would begin. She would learn every name in the citadel. She would form bonds carefully, methodically, in the way that someone builds the infrastructure of something meant to last. She would map the network against her. She would find the names in the letters she couldn't yet read. She would pull the threads until the shape of the thing became visible, and when it was visible, she would hand it to her husband, the king who had reclaimed his mind for her, who had knelt in the mud for her, who had burned a blood contract to ash in the rain, and he would do what kings who love their queens have always done with information about threats. He would end it. But first, she needed to wake up all the way. Not just the sight. Not just the ability to receive what arrived. She needed to understand the full architecture of what she was carrying. The old texts that Beatrice hadn't found yet. The history that had been deliberately removed from the accessible record. She needed to find what had been hidden and why. She needed the names of every seer who had been destroyed and the specific circumstances of each destruction. Because patterns didn't reveal themselves in isolated tragedies, they revealed themselves in repetition, in the consistent signature of a method applied over and over by hands that were confident they wouldn't be recognized. She needed to find the hands. It would take time. The woman in the southern lowlands was patient, and her network was old, and 20 years of careful work was not dismantled in a week. But Alice Remington had something none of the seers who had come before her had. She had a king who believed her. She had a princess who was already 3 texts deep into a history no one was supposed to remember. She had a bond that, with every hour, was deepening the resolution of what she could see. And she had the specific, unflinching determination of someone who has spent 19 years being treated as a problem to be solved, and has recently discovered that she is, in fact, a solution to a problem that no one else can address. The wrong carriage. The right bloodline. The right night. The moon goddess had arranged all of it. The storm, the timing, the very specific route that a desperate girl in a stolen cloak had taken through a chaotic courtyard, with a particular, elaborate patience of something that thinks in generations rather than moments. Alice Remington was not a runaway anymore. She was not a sacrifice. She was not an anchor, or a tool, or a contract to be honored. She was the last of a bloodline that someone had tried very hard to bury. And she had just woken up. All the way. Whatever comes next for Alice and Alaric, whatever name is in those letters, whatever the coven has not yet said aloud, whatever the full truth of the Remington bloodline turns out to be, begins tomorrow. And tomorrow, Alice Remington is ready. And that is where we leave them. Alice at her window, making the decision that changes everything. Alaric 2 corridors away, planning with the mind of a king who has reclaimed it and is not about to waste it. Beatrice in her library, following threads toward names that haven't appeared yet. And somewhere in the southern lowlands, a patient woman writing careful letters to people inside the citadel whose loyalty has not yet been tested. This is not an ending. This is the ground being laid for what comes after. And what comes after is worth coming back for. I need one thing from you right now, before you do anything else. Subscribe to this channel, and hit the notification bell, because the next chapter of this story is coming, and it goes places that part 1 and part 2 together only gestured at. The coven's full prophecy. The names in the letters. The truth about the war that destroyed the Remington bloodline. What Alice sees when her network is finally wide enough to reach the southern lowlands. I want you there when that drops. And here is what I want from you in the comments right now. Tell me what you think Ilarion Cross's plan actually is. Tell me whether you think there's someone inside the Citadel we should already be suspicious of. Tell me what you think the Coven has been hiding. Because I promise you, there is one more layer to the prophecy that neither Alice nor Beatrice has found yet, and I want to know if you can see it coming. And just like last time, tell me where in the world you are watching from. Drop your city, your country, wherever you are. I love knowing where this story is traveling. Last time, we had people from places I never expected. Keep it coming. You found Alice's story. You stayed for both parts. You know what that makes you. Part of the pack. And the pack looks after its own. I'll see you in the next chapter.